Welcome everyone. It's a huge crowd. I've just been told that it's probably one of the pioneer meetings with most guests, so that's quite amazing. And this is a pioneer meeting where pioneers from different trades come and share their tricks and insights in various ways. And Ira just asked me, do you know this podcast we did called Serial? And I believe that everyone in this room knows Serial. I think I'm not mistaken. Serial is a spin-off of This American Life, which is one of the most popular podcasts in the world, if not the most popular. And it's a great pleasure, and I feel we're very fortunate to have Ira Glass here today to share with us a few tricks of great storytelling. The idea is that Ira is going to talk for about half an hour or so, and then there's another half an hour for comments, questions, and discussion. So please welcome Ira Glass.
Thank you. 1, 2, 3, can you hear me?
Yes.
Kolia. I've been practicing badly. I've been thinking about like what I want to talk briefly about what we're doing that I think I don't know, just that's different than what a lot of broadcasters do. And I feel like one of the biggest things, and I talked to, how many people were at the talk that I gave last night? A lot of you. Okay, so I'm going to play about 30% of the same quotes, and then I'll play the rest different. Sorry about that. One of the biggest differences is that although we are journalists, and we are very idealistic journalists, and very aggressive journalists, we also see it as our job to amuse ourselves, and we're not ashamed of that, and we do that in all the stories we do, whether we take on something serious or funny. And as an example, I'm going to play you one of the clips that I played last night. This is a story that we did in Iraq in the early stages of the Iraq War. There were these private contractors. You guys know what these are? Yeah. So just we had been reading about them, and there hadn't been much coverage when we went out because we were just curious, like who are these people? They're basically these mercenary armies that were out there with U.S. forces doing force protection, guarding the U.S. ambassador. It wasn't the U.S. Army guarding the ambassador. It was these hired armies that we hired. And they would get into trouble where they would shoot up civilians. And so as part of an hour that we did, one of our producers, Nancy Updike, did a portrait of one of the guys who worked for a PSD, the security operation for Custer Battles was the company. And just the way she writes this, I would just say, you can tell she's out for her own pleasure in the middle of this serious piece of reporting.
Hank is the man who was brought in to clean up Custer Battle's PSD operation. Hank has a vision for the kind of men he wants working for him.
Steely-eyed, flat-bellied professionals.
It's possible Hank came up with this description by looking in the mirror. He's a 49-year-old man with small blue eyes, a former paratrooper and ranger, the son of a decorated soldier, married to the daughter of a soldier, father of 2 soldiers, one of whom was in Iraq and is now in Afghanistan on a mission he can't talk about. Hank is cryptic. He doesn't want me to use his last name. He won't even tell me what rank he achieved. I looked it up later, Lieutenant Colonel. He's done private security work overseas before. He won't give details, of course. But he will, and this is the thing about Hank. He will poke fun at it.
So you gotta be the look. The security guy looks serious. I'm dead serious about this business. I'm steely-eyed and I'm scanning the horizon constantly. And usually when you go to, like if I go to Africa or someplace like that and you're on some kind of security mission, it takes you about 2 seconds to get off the plane, look around and say, oh, there's somebody else on a mission. And you kind of sidle up to them and you go, SAS, and they nod, and then they go, Rangers, and you kind of nod, and then finally you ask, who are you working for? Of course you can't tell. He asks you and you can't tell. And then you wander off, you see? But you have that initial like dogs sniffing each other, you do. You pick the guys out, they all got the look.
So he wants his PSD guys to have the look.
Steely-eyed, flat-bellied professionals.
And he walks around doing that look. But he also knows it's all a bit of a put-on, a man dance, as he calls it. And with tens of thousands of American military and ex-military and private military in Iraq right now, it's very possible that we are standing in the middle of the largest man dance on the planet.
Okay, so I'd say a couple things about this. First of all, like the character who she's playing as the reporter is, like, first of all, she's just writing the fuck out of this piece of writing, right? And it's really based on her perceptions of this guy. She's mainstream media, right? So she's not picking a side in a dispute. But she's clearly super opinionated about this man. There comes a point later in the show where literally she gets into an argument with him because they're talking about, let me see if I have this clip. Yeah, I have this clip. Where they're talking about how in Iraq, the men will hold hands as they walk down the street. And Hank is a good American soldier, former soldier, and it just is offensive to him, and he's been trying to train them not to do that. And Nancy gets into a fight with him on tape. Hold on, let me see if I'm going to play you this.
I was paying for my lunch one day, and Hank was talking to the hotel's wait staff. And all of a sudden, Hank and one of the Iraqi staff were gripping hands across the counter and trying to pull each other over. Hank finally grabbed the guy's other hand, so he had both of them, and dragged him halfway across. I stood there watching in amazement.
Oh my God. Do you do that with him every day or something?
We have a game of some kind.
Reach across the counter and just try to pull each other over?
That was a new one. That was a new game.
This is a little disturbing to watch.
Usually we arm wrestle, or, you have a balance game where you yank the other guy off balance.
This game of Hank's is not just a game. It's one of his projects. Iraqi men need to work on their upper body strength, he told me more than once. It's very American to say, as George Bush has said, we're not here to change you. We don't want you to become Americans. But we can't help ourselves. Look at Hank. He wants to help, and he knows what will help you. His generosity is interventionist in nature. In the elevator, he explains, it's okay for men to touch each other if they're trying to haul one another over a counter. What's not okay is what he sees Arab men doing every day on the streets of Baghdad.
I'm trying to train the Arabs to be less effeminate, to quit holding hands, and get to the culture where they...
Jesus Christ, let him be. I love that they hold hands.
Okay.
You guys walk around arm in arm?
Yeah, that's not right.
Don't train that out of them.
Don't you think that's not right?
No, I don't think that that's not right.
Okay. Well, let's go down to 314.
Anyway, so I say all this to say, like she's an opinionated person, and I feel like there's a range of our own opinions that we will put into our stories, and that's within them. Like that is totally fine with us, and in that way, I feel like we want the writers to be people in the stories as much as they can. And to give their actual reactions. I mean, her actual surprise at what he's doing comes across. And our amusement at people and our pleasure in people. I feel like we're very awake to that as reporters. Is this part of your tradition as well? I don't want to be... No, okay. Well, I have to say, jump into the water. The water's warm. It's wonderful. It makes your reporting way more fun. And you can do it without... Like I say, you can do it as mainstream media. We are still, doing the news in our way. I feel like this is not saying these people are wrong and these people are right. We're not picking a side. We're just giving our impressions as normal people. When I was a reporter before I did this show, for 20 years I worked for daily news shows, and I have to say, most of the things that we do on our show, I did as a daily reporter in stories that were 3 and 4 and 5 minutes long. And although now I have the luxury of a staff of 11 amazing producers and honestly, because of podcasting, more money than I actually know how to spend after years of poverty. The story tricks that I'm doing, I did as a daily reporter. And doing the same kinds of stories that I think everybody in this room is used to making. Like I did that for 17 years. And one of the easiest things was to have an attitude towards the people in the stories and to what I was trying to do. And I always, my strong feeling was I would give my editor what what they wanted, excuse me, I would give my editors what they wanted and what they were sending me out for, but I had a rule for myself that in every story there had to be something in there that was for my pleasure. And it was a strict rule. Every story there had to be. And often it would be just some little moment that would happen in tape, or just a sentence or two that I could get in the writing, just something I noticed when I was out. And it was a matter of discipline. Also, another one of my rules is that every single story had to have a tape-to-tape transition. That is, you know how in radio broadcasting you often get into this very monotonous sort of like little script and then a quote and then script and then a quote and then script and then a quote. In every story there had to be at least one spot where it went script, quote, quote, back to script, or script, quote, sound, script, sound, quote, script. Like in every story is just a matter of just like pure discipline, just because the rhythm of our news coverage, I think, often makes it a little dull. And another thing, I'm going to play you another clip of this. There's a thing that one of my staffers, Hannah Jaffe-Walt, does that I just noticed. She's been doing it for years, and then I just noticed it. I will say to some of the managers here, I'm 56, and I'm in the odd situation of I have people working for me who are more talented than I am, and it's totally sobering. But now I've decided to take a second step, and now I'm just stealing from them, and so, which seems fair to me. I don't know how they feel about it. Perhaps they can come and give their own talks. And Hannah, especially, I noticed she was doing these things in her pieces where she would just take, again, we're working much longer form than
I'll try not to my.
oh, did I? Sorry. There, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Here we go. I pushed that, there we go. Hannah was doing this thing where she would in like 40 seconds, 30 seconds, have a moment where she would just go to the trouble to describe the characters in the story, and it made the entire story so much better. And I was like, oh, I don't ever go to the trouble to like paint a picture of the person, and the efficiency that she does it is almost annoying. I'm going to play you a clip of this. So this is the story, this incredible story. We did 2-hour-long shows about a subject that sounds a little boring, but they were such good shows about school integration in the United States. Officially, we have integrated schools. Actually, they're completely segregated. Black people and white people all going to different schools. Poor people and rich people all to different schools with different funding. And for one of the stories, Hannah looked at this town in Connecticut where basically they had consciously said, no, we're going to integrate. This was after like a huge scandal and court orders. And there was a guy named John Britton, a wonderful lawyer, who basically, a state commission had found, we're going to do this, we're going to integrate the schools, but nobody was doing it. So he personally did it. Now, John Britton, I will say in this room, the thing that I couldn't say public anywhere else, it's just terrible tape, just terrible quotes. Just every quote, you just be like, oh my God, he's a lawyer. And so he speaks in a very precise, boring way where it's almost like he's trying to destroy the actual quotes. And you can barely get him on the air, but he's a key character in our story. We cannot, we try to cast our stories very carefully, but you cannot tell the story without him. So Hannah, in an act of here's how she brings him on stage. So she explains that there's this whole thing, and then she introduces John.
The person who got Hartford to go from screaming over that report to actually doing what it called for was a man named John Britton. John Britton is a civil rights lawyer. He brings the decorum of a courtroom to all matters. John Britton says, "Excuse my street language," to precede an entirely dignified statement. And elevate simple things, like phone tag.
Hello, Hannah. This is John Britton calling you back as you requested. I'll try you later on today.
I believe you can hear his bow tie.
Yes, sir. Tuesday, the 14th of July. Bye-bye.
Fellow broadcasters, that tape isn't good. That is bad. It's not even real tape. It's a voicemail message. And yet she's like, when she wrote that thing about you can hear his bow tie through the message, the cunning of that writing makes me want to kill her. It's crazy. And then later, the things she's saying, she plants this idea of like, he'll say like, excuse my street language. 1 minute and 12 seconds later, there's a quote from John Britton in the story where he says,
what superintendent do you know would let his employees be a plaintiff in a suit? It's going to, excuse my street language, badmouth the district.
Like, that's how cunning. She's like planting a seed that's gonna, like a minute later you're gonna go like, oh, there's that funny thing. And this is what I'm saying, like we're out for our own pleasure and amusement in everything. So when our show began, like our show went on the air 20 years ago. And when it began, it was a staff of 4 people. Our budget was $227,000. And with that money, we, American, which you multiply times 7 to get to your currency, but I'm not gonna do that now, 1.4 million? Okay, and that was our budget, and we paid our salaries, we built the studio, we did all of our marketing, and we paid all of our contributors. It was not much money. And we were 4 people for many years, actually. For the first decade, we were on the air. And the way that we did our show is that we were a fake documentary show. That is, there would be one story with a staff that small. There would be one story where one of us would go out to the field and you know, do real reporting. And then the rest of the show is made up by works of fiction, nonfiction. Like we would have writers like David Sedaris and other writers read short pieces. And then I would do interviews that we would dress up. And the thing that bound the show together was a tone, but also was the fact that it was narrative. That is, that I came to believe over my time doing the news, that the most effective form, the most effective structure for any story that you can do is that you structure not around the most important information, and then the next most important fact, and then the next most important fact, but that you structure, in fact, around plot. And by plot, I mean any sequence of actions where one thing leads to the next. And obviously, this is not appropriate for breaking news. Breaking news, of course, you do the most important information first and the second. But I'm saying in the world of news features that I live in, like that's the conclusion I came to. Because what happens with plot is that even if you have a very mundane story about everyday people, there's no news peg, nothing. With plot, simply having this thing happen and that lead to this, and that lead to this, and that lead to this, it creates the question, what will happen next? And people will stick around for that. One of the things about our program that's different than all of the programs that I worked on before starting this one is that every radio program I ever worked on, wonderful programs, began with, at the beginning of the hour, there would be a 1 minute, we call it a billboard, where we would summarize, here's what's happening in the hour, you know, we're gonna do this and this and this, there'd be a clip of tape or two, and some music underneath, and that's the opening, the host of the show would do that. And we don't do that on our show. And we don't do that because I think it isn't effective. I think it isn't as effective as starting with plot, the way a TV drama would, pull people into the plot, and then explain, once people are caught up in the stories, if you've heard our show, you know we do this, and explain like, here's what we're about today, here's what we're gonna do. And plot, it can be so simple. As an example, like of the sort of thing, I literally mean like okay, so there's a story we did, this is the opening of a show, I explained that this guy Joel, he worked in an office. Sometimes one of his coworkers would bring her kid to work with her, a 9-year-old, smart kid, kind of a tomboy.
And she would just kind of help out around the office. She would pass mail out. And over the time that I was there, she and I developed this kind of teasing relationship. She would come into my office and she would drop my mail off and stick her tongue out at me, and I would sort of fake chase her down the hallway or something. And you know,
that's sweet.
Yeah, she's an incredibly sweet kid.
Amazing livelihood.
And so there's this day when it's early in the morning. I've arrived at the office, and I go into the bathroom. And when I come out of the bathroom, I have my glasses in my shirt pocket rather than on my head. And I look down this hallway and I see this small person walking towards me. And I then get down and start to crab walk towards her. So I sort of go down on my haunches and put my hands up as if they're claws and kind of waddle towards her. And as I'm waddling towards her, I say, in this kind
I
of
would
creepy
just
voice.
stop it right there. I would just say, okay, at this point, nobody turns off the radio. Okay, but if you think about it, the facts of this story could not be more mundane. Like it's not even actually interesting. If you think about the facts, this is a guy goofing around at the office with the person. Like it's not. Like I say, like there's nothing to this story. But because there's a plot, it is more magnetic than the facts that it depicts. Do you know what I mean? Simply because he's saying like this happened, this happened, this happened, you just want to know. No one turns off the radio at that point, even though it's utterly banal. And once I understood that, that is just an enormously like powerful tool to use both in my news reporting and in feature reporting. And so when I would be doing news reports, I was constantly having people tell me stories and getting them to lay out, wait, what happened? What did she say? What did you say? What did she say? I'm talking very fast. Can you understand? Okay. Like what? And have them tell me stories that then I would put into my stories, which they themselves, on a good day, were narratives which began in a place and moved forward in time. And when we're thinking about like how do we cover things, what we're looking for is narrative in the most traditional way. We want there to be a story. We want the story to move forward. We want someone to have some new thought, some new idea of themselves or the world at the end of the plot. Or at least we should have some thought about their story that's different than we had. And so when we're analyzing what stories are we going to do, which like every editorial operation in the world, we have huge long meetings and discussions about should we do this story or this story or this story. What we're analyzing is what's the plot? Is the plot surprising? What does it tell us? What's the idea it drives at? Is that idea actually interesting and surprising? And then is there someone to relate to? Is there a character who you can have emotions about? I think without a character to have emotions about, you can be in a situation where you're walking through the machine of the story without anybody feeling anything. And it's interesting because I've worked with people, BBC reporters and more newsy reporters, and I find that one of the things that changes the reporting radically is simply having them have people understanding like that you're charting people's feelings as you're charting the plot, and that at every point in the story you would note their feelings. I mean, I know for a lot of people who do documentaries, that's the most obvious thing to say, but I think for those of us like myself who came from a news context, that turns out to be very important. There was another thing I wanted to say too, and that is that we're in the tape way more than most broadcasters, and that's a choice. And I think that most of us television, radio reporters, we've been trained that to be in the tape is putting ourselves in the story in some way. And I have to say, like, I don't agree with that at all. I think actually all stories, breaking deadline stories, every kind of story would be more interesting if the reporter were in the tape more, reacting, joking with the interviewee in an appropriate context, arguing with the interviewee if that's the right context. And I feel like what makes a lot of broadcasting very flat is that the reporters are not in the tape talking to the interviewees. And I think giving that up is giving up one of the most powerful tools we have. It's almost like deciding to do bad writing all the time instead of good writing. Because what you have in an interview is you have a potential drama between yourself and the other person. And the kinetics of that drama are actually really interesting. I want to play you two examples of this. One of these is something I played last night. And this is something we did. Again, this was an hour-long show. We were on an aircraft carrier that was flying bombing missions over Afghanistan 3 months after September 11th, 2001. And so it's the early stages of that war. And as the hour goes on, you're going to be meeting people who are killing people and risking their lives and very well might be shot down. But a lot of the show was about just kind of what life on this 5,000-person ship. And we opened the show. I had a piece of script where I say, our enemies are in hiding. Some live in caves, some cross borders in disguise, some live in safe houses. Meanwhile, on a warship with a crew of 5,000, an American sailor is doing her job in the war on terror.
My name is Creevon Scott. Just filling up the vending machines.
Is that your full-time job?
Yes.
It's your full-time job?
Yeah. Filling up vending machines all day for 12 hours.
I'm mixing this in a horrible way. What are the big sellers?
Like right now it's Snickers and Starburst. Snickers goes real fast.
What's the least favorite candy on board?
Bonkers, the fruit chews. We got boxes of those and still have them. Sometimes if we don't have anything else, we'll just put it all rolls of Bonkers and they'll still stay in here.
Some people hate Bonkers. They just know it like them.
We still got them, but we've been ordering a whole lot of new stuff, so I've been trying to keep like a whole variety of things in here. Like Crunchy Munch, we just got the Crunchy Munch, and the cheeses we normally didn't have in here.
Cheez-Its?
Yeah, the cheeses, the different kind of cheeses.
So the producer who's doing that interview, Alex, I feel like part of what makes the tape work is you can hear his pleasure in what he's learning from her. He's like surprised and amazed, and he's laughing, and I feel like it makes it so much more alive. Well, here's another example. This is Sarah Koenig, the host of Serial. We're covering a flood in Mississippi, and what she's doing is she's driving to this little town that has been completely devastated by this hurricane. Sorry, we're covering a hurricane.
15 miles outside of Pearlington.
Oh, I should say, so what's interesting is like she doesn't have an interviewee in the tape that you're about to hear. Here we go.
15 miles outside of Pearlington, I got my first shock. I was following Jeannie in her truck, and she stuck her arm out the window and pointed.
Oh, wow, tombs, holy crap. There are just tombs on the side of the road, like coffins, like coffins, are just sitting on the side of the road. White coffins with lids. Luckily they're closed. Oh my God.
This part of the country isn't very high above sea level, so when the cemetery is flooded, the caskets just came floating up out of the ground. The ones I saw had landed in some bramble on the other side of the highway.
So again, just so this is clear, what's happening is Sarah is in her car, the person who's leading her to town is in a truck in front of her, she has her tape recorder on, and she's just recording what she sees, and she happens to see these coffins. And what makes the tape work is the reporter's amazement of just like, oh my God, coffins. And then she goes into town and starts looking around.
The streets have been cleared by now, so you can see the plan of what was the town. But on either side of the roads, where the houses used to be, there's carnage. Some houses have collapsed on themselves. Some the wind has stripped to the frame, so they almost look like new construction. As people showed me their homes, it was hard to know how to react.
Which is your house? Behind?
Oh my God.
Well, it's just so, that tree is so perfectly crushing your house. I'm sorry to laugh, but it's like, it's so shocking.
It's a mess, along with the water that went through it.
Yeah, laughing at an accident victim. Do you know what I mean? Like that's not in our reporter handbook to do that at all, you know? But I feel like it's her reaction that's giving the thing life. Or this is another example I just remembered. This is from this show we did, which honestly is maybe the most popular hour we've ever done. In 2008, as the mortgage crisis hadn't even really started to kick in, one of my producers, Alex Bloomberg, the one who's talking to Krivon, just became very interested in whether the United States economy was going to collapse. And there were a bunch of people going around. In fact, two of the people who talked to him are the people portrayed in the film The Big Short. They were our sources on the story. And they came to him, they said, the whole economy is going to collapse. And here's why, and explained to him about mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps. And then we tried to figure out how do you document this. And so what we did, again, casting is key for these sorts of things. We started to go to the beginning. We basically started with a mortgage and then explained how the person shouldn't have gotten the mortgage at all. And because there were these problems called no interest, no asset loans that anyone could get. And what it meant was you didn't need to prove you had a job, and you didn't need to prove you had any property to back up the loan for your house. Because the premise was housing prices always rise, and so if you default on the loan, they'll just seize the house, which didn't take into account the fact that housing prices fall sometimes. And then they would bundle these worthless securities from people who couldn't pay, you know, thousands of them into these securities, and pretended that they were AAA rated securities when in fact they were worth nothing and hence worldwide economic disaster. So when we started the show with this guy, again, a very typical interview for us, and again, I would just emphasize the presence of the interviewer is so important.
Call it 540 for round figures.
This is a guy explaining the mortgage that he got when he basically he had a couple of part-time jobs, didn't really have a decent income at all.
Call it 540 for round
$540,000.
You basically borrowed $540,000 from the bank, and they didn't check your income.
All right.
It's a no-income verification loan. They don't call me up and say, you know, how much money, they don't do that. I mean, it's almost like you pass a guy in the street and you say, let me $540,000? He said, well, what do you do? I got a job. Okay.
All right, that wasn't an example of what I was looking for at all. Yeah, I thought that the interviewer was much more in that quote, but in my memory, he was. So that's one thing, we're in the tape, and then we cast these things very carefully. So for example, a few years ago, in the United States, when the Tea Party became a huge factor in our politics, we tried to figure out how to cover the Tea Party, and at the time, many broadcast organizations did stories where they would go out with these right-wing Tea Party people and do these stories that, to my taste, were competent and informative, but very anthropological in a bad way. It was almost saying, here are these specimens, these strange white people who, many of them were senior citizens who were getting government checks, but believed no one else should get government checks. And very exercised, like they themselves were the recipients of government benefits, but they didn't want black people and others to get them, but wouldn't anyway, I have a lot of feelings about this. And it was a kind of like, these people are so mad. Like, what makes these people so mad? And it was just very like, people from New York City going out into the rural areas to look at these strange specimens that we call normal people in a way that, again, competent, but like not what we do. And so we tried to figure out like, what's a story that we can find? And one of my producers, Ben Calhoun, basically called one Tea Party group after another, looking to cast the story that we wanted to do, because what we wanted to be was inside a drama. And what he found was so perfect. He found this one town, this little town called Petoskey, and these two guys who were about 40 years old, they had been best friends since they were children, and they both got really excited by the Tea Party ideals. And they started to have meetings, and people are coming to their meetings, and then it's getting bigger and bigger. They're having rallies, and like 100 people are showing up at the rallies, and now they're having speakers come in, and 1,000 people are showing up. And so there's this whole arc of like, oh my God, look, we're part of a movement of people who believe something. And then, good for us, terrible for the people in the story, which is, of course, what our job is. The congressional elections came up, and one of the two best friends wanted to support the hardcore Tea Party values guy who had no chance of winning. And one of them wanted to support a traditional Republican politician, had a lot of money behind him, had some other offices, gave some lip service to the Tea Party ideals, but could get elected. So one goes idealistic, one goes practical, and it kills their friendship. Like literally by the end of it, they are not friends. They hate each other. One of them goes to work for the practical guy as his campaign manager, and the other guy gives us these incredible quotes. Hold on, let me find this. Hold on. Yeah, like this.
I guess Rich feels he's doing good, and the money came, so I hope the hell it was a lot. I hope it was a king's ransom, dude. I hope it wasn't just some chump change, because, I mean, I would hope that my friendship is worth 10 grand.
He's talking about the money that the guy earned as the campaign manager, which was like nothing. Anyway, like you see, like so that's good. Or covering Donald Trump. You know, we have this candidate named Donald Trump. He's been in the news here at all. Fascinating thing that's going on. One of the ways that we covered it is Zoe Chase such a talented reporter. she went out, like, she and I are obsessed with Donald Trump. And so she went out just going to rallies and meeting people, and she kept finding these things where people who were not Trump supporters, like Republicans, good old-fashioned Republicans, cannot understand why the people they love want this crazy man to be president. And so she did a whole story about this guy named Tony, who's an evangelical Christian radio broadcaster, has a Christian radio show in South Carolina, and he himself is a pastor. And his problem with Trump is just a bad Christian. He doesn't share their values. He doesn't the values that around which Tony governs his entire life. And his Christian audience, Tony just figures, my audience will come with me, because their natural candidate is the Christian candidate, Ted Cruz. And Tony really likes Ted Cruz and everything Ted Cruz stands for. And he just figures all of his listeners are coming with him, and none of his listeners are with him. They all love Trump, and Tony cannot understand it. And there came a point when Tony was sure, there were 2 points when Tony was sure, but this one was really the key one, sure that Trump would lose all the Christians, all the evangelicals. And it was when Trump said, we need to ban Muslims from coming to America.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
I was horrified. I'm thinking to myself, this is so opposed to everything that are my core values. Christians, they're going to be appalled by this.
And hold on, let me see, do I have a script here? Yes, and so again, his callers, good Christians, all of them, they all side with Trump. So here's a caller who he calls the Trump interpreter, a guy named Barry Chisholm, who calls into his radio show.
It's a religion.
Their ideology is absolutely a conquering ideology.
He's saying, I don't know if you can hear, he's saying Muslims have a conquering ideology. That's the problem with Muslims. That's why we have to ban them from the United States.
So,
okay. Well, why don't we ban Christians? Why don't we, Christians have in their background an ideological conquering mentality. What I'm trying to get you to see is that once we start down a road where we tell people that because of their religious expression, we're going to deny them entry into the country, we're setting a precedent.
I disagree, because that's not what he's saying. It's their ideology. It's the connection with terror. That's what he's talking about.
But all Muslims are not terrorists. All Muslims are not terrorists. All Christians don't shoot abortion doctors and bomb abortion clinics. I don't want to get lumped in with them because I'm a Christian any more than there are Muslims that don't want to be lumped into the idea of terrorism because they're radical Islamic extremists who are trying to kill people. Barry, thanks for the call. Robbie, I'm going to have to talk to you. We'll come back and talk to Robbie.
Anyway, so I say, like casting is everything. I have to say, like, for us as people following the news in the United States, like, the candidates are really interesting, but what's really perplexing to us as Americans is we're not, like, it's just figuring out, wait, why is Trump so popular? Like, what's going on? And one of the things that Zoe and I have been trying to figure out, and honestly, we have not figured it out, is it's all about immigration, okay? And like, so much of the fervor for Donald Trump, and I have to say, like, we do not understand. Zoe's she's done so many interviews like this, where she'll say to somebody, so, like, what's the #1 issue facing our country? And they'll say, immigration. She's like, great, why do you believe that? Have you lost your job to an immigrant? Do you know someone who has? No. Do you work in an industry? Do you live in a town where immigrants are even a big presence? No. And she's just like, well, why is this given all the problems facing our country, why is this the #1 problem? And we honestly, I have to say, like, we still have not cracked it. And I have to say, like, going out and I don't know, like, casting with the voters, I feel like has been more interesting than anything else. Okay, I'm running out of time. And then we'll do things like, so we cast these things very carefully. We did a show on climate change, And which I think is I mean, you guys may feel differently, you live in a different country. I think nobody wants to hear anything else about climate change. I think that whenever we go on the air and we start to talk about it, I feel like even in our story meeting, we can't convince each other. Because I feel like it's a story where we all know what we think. We all know, okay, we have the big picture, we're fucked. And so, like, getting the latest details on exactly how fucking we are, you know what I mean? Like, to begin an hour-long broadcast, and okay, an hour on climate change, like, nobody's just like, yeah, I got it. And so you really need, it's one of a number of issues, environmental issues, first of all. In our case, in the United States, Guantanamo is like this, abortion rights are like this, gun rights are like this. As soon as you bring it up, nobody gives a fuck, because everybody knows what they think. They all know, like, I hate those guys, I know what I think, I don't need the details. And I think to get anybody to listen to anything new you have to say requires incredible cunning. And honestly, like, often I said this last night in the talk, we try to disguise what the hour is going to be for as long as we can. And like, get you caught up in like characters and scenes. And when we did climate change, again, very hard to cover. And the way that we did it, again, we cast very carefully. We found this guy who was the chief climate guy for the state of Colorado. This was 2 years ago. Every summer, Colorado, basically the entire state was on fire. Like, literally, like, on fire because it's so dry. People who are raising cattle are having, there's no water for these cattle. But, interestingly, the people who do not believe climate change exists, which is still, I think it's like 70% of the Republican Party in the United States, is something like a third of all of America believes climate change isn't happening. The people who don't believe it exists are, of course, the right-wing ranchers and farmers who are most affected by the change in climate. And so this guy's job is to tell ranchers and farmers, here's what the weather is going to be like next year. Here's what it's going to be for you. And we found this guy, and he was really torn. His name was Nolan Duskin, because he would not come out and say climate change is real, even though he believes it's real. And the reporter just would go around to him as he would go to ranches, and he would talk to them, and they began, and he's a super wonderful guy, and he would talk to these ranchers about you know, like they would say, like, we haven't had any water for 3 years, like, what are we gonna do? And you know, they would just talk, and he wouldn't say to them, you should sell this land, because if the climate models are correct, in 40 years, it's gonna be like this summer every year. Like, scientifically, like, the summer that we have now, it's just gonna be like that more and more. And like, you should move, like, you're gonna stay in the business. And, but he doesn't say that to them, because he feels like as soon as he says that he's for, that he believes in climate change, they will discount everything he has to say, because they'll just see him as the enemy. And so he's really caught in the middle of not knowing what to, and I think he's right, too. Like, I think he's really right. And she was with him as he was going at the end of the year, every year, there's a speech that he gives to, like, at the state fair, to all the farmers and ranchers who come to the state fair. And he was planning on finally saying, this is real, at that speech. And then in the speech, he kind of was a really good setup for a story without a good last scene, because it wasn't like a Denzel Washington movie where he gives the speech and people stand on their feet and they, you know, it's like he just kind of wusses out when he gets to the speech. But it does, you know, you can see the dilemma he's in. I feel like what we're looking for is a drama where something will happen, and the fact that he was leading up to the speech was like the ticking time bomb on the story. And then we'll do other things just because we'll just try stuff. So one of my favorite things we've ever done is we did a car dealership in Long Island, and we did an entire hour episode just watching them try to sell their monthly quota of cars. They had to sell 129 cars by the end of the month, and it was not going well. And they were just pulling out every step. By the end of the month, really, like, people are calling up relatives saying, you're buying a car. And we just explain that, and then inside that, you learn that the economics of the car business has totally changed. But the drama is finding these very funny guys who are trying to sell cars, each with their own theory about how to sell a car, enact in a very novelistic way, like, how do you sell? So other things I'll talk about briefly, and then I'll take some questions. One is one of the tricks to making our show is we run at way more material than we need. We probably I mean, I have to say, like, we'll develop twice as many stories as we use in any given show. And we did this thing, maybe you all are doing this, I don't know how widespread this is, but we use Google Docs, And once a week at a story meeting, rather than pitch each other's stories, what we'll do is that we'll write up the stories ahead of time on one Google Doc that we share as a staff, and then all of us will talk to each other in the document before we ever meet. So that we basically fight out, do we think this story is good enough in that document? And then some stories just die in the document, and some stories obviously like live. We decided as a staff in the document, you can tell we're absolutely, this story is great. And then the ones that are hard to figure out, then we'll talk about in person. But it saved an enormous amount of time. Though the Google Doc has gotten to be very large. Like in any given week, it's like 25 pages to describe each story and then to do the pitches. And then, like I say, we will run out a tremendous amount of material, and we will throw out a tremendous amount of material. The show that we did last week, oh my God, on Tuesday of last week, we broadcast on Friday nights. On Tuesday, we realized that all 5 stories that we had been considering for the second half of the show were shit. Like every single one of them was just like, not so great. It was okay. We could totally get it on the air. We are professional people, but we just didn't want to put them on the air. And so instead, if you listen to last week's radio show, which is called For Your Reconsideration, the second and third acts are things that we invented between Tuesday and Friday. And that's not unusual, I'm sad to say. We really are very aggressive about if we think something is just okay, we figure and this was true when we had no money and we were tiny. Like we figure we're a weekly show. The one advantage we have over a daily show is that we can just remake it and we'll just figure out a way. And what we ended up filling it with was this excerpt from this incredible podcast. This excerpt is so wonderful and so live. It's so original. So that was great. And then one of my producers had been secretly gathering tape for this tiny little personal story. And he's like, okay, we can kind of pretend that this is on the theme of this week's show, and we'll wedge that in. So there's that. And then the other thing I would say is our process is that we edit. We just edit the fuck out of stuff. Like, and the way our system is that if I'm one of the producers on the show and working with an outside reporter or not, I'm just producing it myself. At some point when I get to a first draft, I'll play it for one person or possibly 2 people, the editor of the show and whoever is producing that week's episode. In any week of our show, each story is produced by a different producer, and then the episode itself is produced by one of the producers on staff, and then that person is responsible for finding all the stories and deciding these stories are shit and these stories are good and we're not going to do this, we are going to do that. And that producer will sit in on all the edits with me and the show's editor. And so what we'll do is when we're doing these stories, we'll take it'll be like the producer who's producing the story and 1 or 2 people, and they'll read the script and play the quotes and read the script, and then we'll give notes and all that. And then the person rewrites, and then the second time we play it, we bring in one person who's never heard it. And then the third time we play it, we bring in a new person. In every edit, there's some new person who's never heard the thing. And often we'll go for big stories, 5, 6, 7, 8 edits. By the time we're done, it's like a lot of people sitting around a room. And again, this is a luxury that you get as a weekly show that obviously anybody doing daily broadcasting doesn't have. But I feel like the stories are good because of the editing. I think it's weird. In my experience in broadcasting, a great editor is more rare than a great reporter. And if you are reporters, I would say everybody knows that there's 3 kinds of editors. There's the editors who are like, they're okay, they help you a little sometimes. That's most editors. Then there's the rare editor who's horrible and destroys everything you do. And then there's also the rare editor who's wonderful and everything they touch makes it better. And I feel like, I don't know, I wish more people would go into editing because I think it's so important. And
there's about 10 minutes left.
There's about 10 minutes left. Yes, let me take questions. I just want to say one more thing about podcasting, and then questions. And that is, the podcasting thing has been crazy for us. And to give you a sense of scale, our show is heard by 2.2 million people on the radio, and just this August, the podcast has been 2.2 million for a decade. And then the podcast began at 0, and now in August became the same number. Now they're equally sized, and the podcast keeps growing. And the podcast is global, of course, and we're on 500 radio stations around the United States. And the podcast has led to so much money. Like that's how we're able to send 5 reporters into a high school for 3 months, or commission a musical, or send people on 3-month-long investigations. Like we now have a staff of 11 or 12 producers and support people, and it's just like a huge staff. And then our spinoff, Serial. Each episode of Serial of season 1 has had 10.7 million people download it, each episode. And then season 2 is on its way to the same numbers. And again, like there's just, there are pluses and minuses in the way to run these things, but like the fact that we can take these little 15-second underwriting announcements have meant we just have millions of dollars. Like it's just, I mean, I say this as somebody like used to working with no money at all, like really like with nothing. It's an incredible thing to have money. Let me take your questions. Perhaps you haven't heard. This just is.
Who would like to ask a question?
Yes.
What happened to the guy with the glasses in his shirt pocket chasing
Here's what happened.
No one turns off the radio at this point.
Well, I had another point to make. Here's what happens.
And as I'm waddling towards her, I say, in this kind of creepy voice, "Oh no, I can't believe you're here today." And then at that moment, as I say, "today," she comes into focus. And I realize, in fact, it's not at all the young girl who I thought it was, but in fact one of our interns, a business intern who is a midget.
And then after that, other things happen. And it drives to the night. Yes, somebody else. I like that story was so mesmerizing that was the question.
I was just wondering, everything you say is wonderful, and very good. You started out saying this is for feature material. You do long features, it's very entertaining, there's some really good tricks that we can all use. But do you have any good tricks to use in more like investigative journalism, in boring stories about budgets and politics and stuff like that? I mean, can you do these tricks with that kind
You
of
absolutely can. Yeah. I mean, I'm saying features, but like we do a tremendous amount of investigative reporting. Like it's probably a third of what we do. And budgets are an issue. I feel like the only way into like a decent budget story is to find a character with a mission. Like, yeah.
Actually, that's what I'm asking. How do you find first in the budget story?
Well, I think any reporter on a beat will know who the characters are, who are interesting, who are fighting over the budget. And then I would just look for one of them who's on some sort of mission, either to do this or that, and then follow them. Like honestly, like there are certain subjects that are just very, very hard to do in an interesting narrative way. But in the end, like narrative is about people kind of moving through time with a mission. And so if you find the right person with some sort of mission for the budget, either to keep their part of the budget alive, to take out some part of the budget, to lobby for some part of the budget, like a budget fight is still a fight. And so there are people in conflict. And I think that's your best bet. I mean, I don't want to be glib about it. Like, it's not easy, and not every story is going to work out, for sure.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you were you called it a fake documentary show, I think, and that you have stories that are on a spectrum of fiction to non-fiction in different places.
Yes, I'm saying the fake. No, the stories, the journalism was all completely real journalism. I'm saying it was a fake documentary because we weren't going out and doing hardcore documentary. We were doing interviews in the studio and pretending like it was that. In fact, we never used the word documentary on the radio because I think nobody wants to hear a documentary. We would never call our show a documentary show. Like when you say your show is a documentary show, it's like saying it's going to be boring. And so, although we are a documentary show, we never use the word.
But my question was actually about the episode with Mike Daisey and what turned out to be distorted facts, I think, in his story. Did the fact that you have David Sedaris and more fictional stories complicate things for you?
No, he's asking, can you guys hear the question? So we did an episode where this storyteller, this guy who would go on stage and tell these stories, named Mike Daisey, he told a story about Apple, how they make the Apple computers and iPhones in China. And I saw him perform this story on a stage in New York, and he was touring with it. And I met with him afterwards, and I said, is this story true? And he said, it's absolutely true. Like, he's somebody who flew to China, went to Shenzhen, China, and visited factories and talked to people. And I said, well, what I'd like to do is, like, you know, cut down a version of it and do like a short version of it on the radio, if you're game. He said, yes. And I said, we're going to fact check this. And he said, fine. And then we did fact check it. We don't, for me, it's a completely black and white thing. Like, we're doing journalism. Every fact has to be true. And we made a mistake. Like, we made, in retrospect, a really stupid mistake. And that is, we checked with people, you know, we talked to people who work in those factories, labor rights groups that are in the factories, management people who are in those factories, about all the things that he alleges go on in the factories. We checked. And they all checked out as true, except for one thing that didn't check out as true. And in the original broadcast, he says this is true. We can't find any verification. But he says he met somebody, you know, who told him this, and like, he's saying it, we can't verify it, we don't know it's true. He said that in the original broadcast. And then what happened is, the one thing that we didn't check is we could not reach his translator. He gave us a phone number, the person wasn't at that phone number. He's like, well, this is just some lady who was at the hotel, like, who they sent me. I mean, he's in a reporter. He flew to China, and he's like, can you get me a translator? And they hooked him up with this lady. And so we didn't talk to his translator just to see what the translator said. And then after we broadcast the show, a reporter in China found the translator who said that although the things he said about Apple were true, none of the people he said he met, none of the incidents in his story were true. He hadn't met any of those people. Like, all the things he said he saw, he did not see. And so the whole story was untrue. And honestly, like, we just fucked it up. And then since then, and then we did an entire hour, like, A, explaining to the audience, like, that we had fucked this up. B, talking to him about, like, what was going through your head, like, why did you do this, which was fascinating. And C, going back to the audience and saying, okay, so that story is a lie, so let's talk about, again, what is true about these factories, what can we say definitively, because let's not lose sight of what the story is about. So that took an hour. And then since then, we've hired professional fact checkers. Like, we have a fact-checking team that we work with. There's a professional fact checker on there. I mean, before then, we fact-checked the way that we do for daily news, which is, you know, you talk to your editor, and your editor, like, you know, on a big investigative story, obviously, would spend more time fact-checking, but on most of the reporting, just be like an editor and a reporter, the way that we did when I was a news reporter. But after that, we fact-check the way that, like, the New Yorker magazine does, or a big national magazine does. There are fact-checkers who do it, which is a wonderful luxury. Yeah.
So we're running out of time. One last question from
okay, sure. I was thinking about the story you told about the clip you played about the guy with the midget. Telling a story that way, focusing on what happens now, what happens next, is really about trust, I think, because we all know that you're going to give us something in the end, and you did in this. You had a great punchline, but when you choose stories, what's more important, the punchline or the ability to tell it like a plot, like I said? I don't know if
the plot is more important. Like, there has to be a series of things that happen. But then obviously you want anything you're doing, like in anything you broadcast, you want it to be surprising. Like, you want it to be something people haven't heard before. So we're very awake to the points in the plot where the plot twists or turns, or gives you something you don't expect. You need both.
That's what you did with Serial. It's not the ending that's important, but I think in my line of work, we're very focused on the ending. So it's interesting.
Yeah, the process, it was interesting because when they were doing the reporting, Sarah and Dana and Julie, they like, when we were talking about it, they kept going back and forth about whether they thought he was guilty. And I was just like, you have to make this part of the show. Like your confusion over what to think about Adnan, like, is the most fascinating part of this. And the engine through which the whole thing runs. And I think a more traditional broadcaster would be scared of putting that in. And I think what Serial shows is that you can be like a journalist of the highest order, like the level of investigation she's doing could not be better. But also include in, without calling attention to yourself, just here's what this data leads you to think, you know, as you go through it.
Okay, thank you. I think we're coming up to the news now. It's top of the hour. I just want to say, first of all, thank you to you, Ira, for coming here. And one of the reasons why you're here is, and what has made it possible is really Copenhagen Radio Cinema. And there's another event with you, I believe Saturday night. So I promise to advertise that. That's somewhere in Copenhagen. If you want to know where it is, they have a Facebook page where you can read about it. And also, I've been told that you are a fan of Danish television drama.
Yes, I am.
And so, if you haven't seen them all, or if you want to see them again, this is one of the most popular.
Which one?
It's called Borgen.
Oh, that's the one I've seen.
Okay.
It's good to have a copy of it. I haven't seen season 3.
Okay, and one last thing. You've asked if there are anyone who would maybe share ideas and maybe start some kind of collaboration with all those $millions of dollars that you just advertised. I'm sure there are plenty here that would love to work with you. So we've arranged that Louise is going to find a room, find somewhere where you can continue the conversation. So if anyone wants to continue the conversation with Ira, you can do so. So thank you very much, and thank you to you, Ira.